somebody freeing up a bunch of time so that somebody can spend more time reading and sending emails to which they will then have to read and send responses from responses, that's not actually a meaningful savings of time. Okay, so blended is better. Now, by this I mean, when I say blended is better, what I'm talking about here is that we want to avoid getting stuck in a single way of thinking about testing, okay, and a single way of approaching it. Imagine if you were hiring a carpenter to do some work in your house, and this guy came to you. You talk to this guy over the phone. He sounded reasonable. The guy came to you, and he said, "Okay, I'm here." And you said, "Where's your toolbox?" He says, "I don't need a toolbox. I've got everything I need right here." And he's got hanging from his tool belt a single thing, a hammer. And he says, "I'm able to do everything that I need to do with this hammer. And anything that doesn't involve using this hammer doesn't need to be done, and I can do everything that I have to using this one tool." And I think, unfortunately, we see that with clients. We see that in this field, that there are people who are inflexibly stuck on one test strategy or one test tactic. So we run into people who are, 100% focused on automation. It's like, well, any test we want to do, it's got to be automatable. We don't want to do any manual testing at all. Well, yeah, but then that basically you're assuming that there are no important quality risks related to things which either require frequent intervention or a tester being involved to interpret the results. That's a leap. Most of the time when we see clients, now not all the time, but most of the time when we see clients that have this 100% automated testing strategy, they are making the mistake of it's the only thing that needs to be done is there's things that can be done with my hammer. They're seeing the world through that. The tool is magical, and generally the testing is not aligned with company needs in those cases, or organizational needs, or project needs. And similarly, we see this with people who are pursuing 100% reactive testing techniques of exploratory testing or use of Whitaker's attacks or something like that. Now, I'm a big fan of these things in an appropriate blend, and but I don't think that reactive test techniques by themselves are typically the answer. Now, for every rule, there's an exception. We had a project that we did for a client just recently where indeed all we did was exploratory non-scripted testing. But this is exceptional, and we think long and hard about this before we decided that's the way to go. Generally, when we see test teams that we consider effective, they are using blended strategies and blended tactics. So they're using some degree of analytical risk-based testing mixed with some amount of reactive testing, mixed with some amount of automated testing, and maybe they've also got some model-based testing in there, and then maybe they've also got some methodical testing following checklists or defect taxonomies, those sort of things. They're basically trying to come at the testing problem with a lot of different strategies. So here's an example of blended versus straight. So we had a client that was using analytical strategy, analytical requirements-based initially, and then they said, okay, well, we're going to adopt some exploratory testing. We're going to put about 20% of the test execution effort into exploratory testing. We're going to do analytical risk-based testing. And their defect detection effectiveness, in other words, the percentage of defects that were found in testing prior to product being released to the field, jumped from 92% to 95%. Now you might say, well, that's not a big deal. It's only a 3% increase, but keep in mind that once your defect detection effectiveness is 90% or above, every percentage point increase above that is hard won. particularly you start to get to the 95% range, there's a whole lot of constraints and pressures that make it harder to push much above that. And we had another client using a similar blend which had defect detection effectiveness of 94%, which has gone up as they continue to fine-tune their strategy. So don't think about testing strategies as religions, like you have to pick one and believe in one, and then that's the one true way. So for those of you who have run into this that concept floating around on the internet that there's you've got to fit into one kind of approach for testing or another, I think that's really very dangerous. I mean, I think that's starts to become the cult of the hammer, the cult of the saw, the cult of the screwdriver. You're completely obsessed with some particular strategy that you've come up with, and you lose sight of the fact that under certain circumstances, other strategies are appropriate. Okay. All right. Now, it is almost axiomatic amongst testers that, like Rodney Dangerfield, we get no respect. But is that always true? Well, certainly there are some testers and test teams that do feel like Rodney Dangerfield, and that they think, oh, people don't appreciate us and so forth. Now, why is that? Is that because they happen to be working in a company that is populated by sadistic developers and project managers who need someone around that they can disrespect and mistreat? Well, I guess if you're paranoid, you can believe that that's the reason for it. What we've seen is that this seems to be a result of not having a clearly defined mission with clearly defined success criteria that's well attached to things that the company values. If we can't actually say, okay, this is what we do, and this is what our target is, and this is why that's important to the organization. If you can't talk about those things crisply, we find is that people just don't really see the value of testing. It's just not clear. And testing, the thing with testing too is that testing as an activity by itself has no value. Is testing to the extent that it connects with other things the organization values going to give us value. So it's very important that we make that clear connection between what's our mission, what are we there to do, what are our success criteria. And when we've seen test teams that have done this effectively, and admittedly it's a hard thing to do, and not very many test teams have managed to do it, but for those test teams that have managed to do that, we see those test teams as valued by people across the organization. And part of it is not just defining this stuff, but reaching out to people to make sure that you're constantly looking to expand your list of stakeholders and expand the ways in which you can provide services to them. Okay, so here are some quotes from project stakeholders. These are not testers, about one test team that we looked at, a particularly effective test team when we did an assessment. What are some of the things they say? QA gives me an increased comfort level and